Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you're about to receive the world's first international medical podcast, hosted by three paramedics from different countries. Live from the UK, Finland and Australia, this is critical.
Hi guys, and thank you for tuning in. Should clinicians work in a government-run healthcare or maybe in private run healthcare? Which is better? What is better? Where is the better pay? Where is the better social allowance? Let's find out what is the international perspective. My name is Alex Hepner and this is Group Call Live. Live from Australia, Mr. Timo Silva, straight from Finland, and live from Australia, Mr. Harrison Steed. Good afternoon to you, Harrison, and good morning to you, Timo.
Good morning.
How are you today, guys?
Yeah, I'm really good. Just enjoying the sunny start to a new week here in Finland.
Doing well isn't what you said before, but we'll leave it at that.
Yes. I might be a bit hungover from a music festival that happened during the weekend, but I'm powering through.
Good.
We're doing well over here as well.
Cool. So let's start with disclaimers. I used to work for privates back in Poland. Now I work for government-run healthcare in the United Kingdom. What about you, Mr. Steed?
So here I work in a government-run service. I haven't worked in a privately run ambulance service here, but know plenty of people that have.
Mr. Silva?
I have worked with private providers before, but not much. I've mostly worked in a government-run organizations, which is basically the default here.
Okay, all right. So Poland. Let's start with Poland. Why not? Up to 2019, I believe, or 2018, we had a mixture of, and I'm talking about the ambulance service. We had a mixture of private-run ambulance services and government-run ambulance services. And again, I can be wrong. So if there's anyone from Poland watching the stream, please correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section below. Is that 2018 or 2019 when Poland actually nationalized? Is that the word? Nationalized healthcare. And got rid of private providers from ambulance service. So if you dial 999 in Poland, you will always get the national healthcare. It's slightly different when it comes to transport. So you may have private and government-run ambulances. And in hospital, if you think about hospitals, majority of let me rephrase that. All A&Es, every single A&E in Poland is government-run. However, there are some private hospitals where you can get some posh services and I don't know, like planned surgeries and all, and so on. My experience from Poland, where I worked for privates, was actually quite good. Definitely better finance than government ambulance service. Definitely better equipment. However, there was like a law that or framework that basically gave us the minimum requirements for ambulance and equipment. However, we had always slightly better equipment. So let's say that government-run healthcare had life packs 12s. We always had life packs 15s, and so on. So slightly better equipment, but ended up. So I don't know what is the situation in Poland now in terms of equipment. From what I see on Facebook, it looks really good. Now, pay-wise, it was horrendous, and it's not really much better. It improved, so pay for a private company was always better in Poland than for government-run ambulance service. Now, of course, there are no private ambulance services in Poland, but the pay for paramedics working for government is also not great. It's far better than it was. So when I left country in 2015, I used to work for, let me see, £4 per hour. And I know that now the salary in government-run healthcare, government-run ambulance service is slightly better. It's now around 10 to £12 per hour. But that's Poland now. Let's move to United Kingdom. I work for NHS for government-run ambulance service, and the pay is it's average for my band. So approximately, I think it's around 12 to £14 per hour, and that's before the taxation. But private companies here are present in the 999 environment. You may get a private ambulance when you call 999, and that's not your choice. It is availability of NHS trucks to private trucks, but the dispatcher is one. So there is a central dispatch that can dispatch either NHS or private ambulance, and usually the difference is just proximity. So which ambulance is closer to actual call goes there. And of course, private company needs to have a special contract with NHS and fulfill all the requirements that NHS has. And now, in terms of equipment, is very different. Of course, it depends from company to company. There are private companies that are, I would say that they have slightly better equipment than NHS. There are some private companies that have slightly worse equipment than NHS. However, salary, oh guys, I cannot even compare it. So private salary is far higher, and also you may get a so-called golden hello if you join private ambulance service. And I think, of course, it's vary from company to company, but basically it's approximately £1,000 to £3,000 lump sum when you transfer to private company.
Wasn't it like a thing that, because I heard when I was working in the UK, some of my course mates from the course, the clinical course that you taught us, they went to work with the privates. But I heard some for some companies you have to buy your own equipment, so like they will provide you with a car, and that's about it really.
So
that's true.
Okay, that was the case like a couple of years ago. From what I know now, there's nothing like that. But however, again, you guys, our viewers, our listeners, if you know anything else or anything more, please let us know in the comments below. I know that Timo is watching the comments section quite closely, so let us know. Later on I will jump to Reddit because we have some interesting comments from our Reddit viewers. But yeah, Timo, getting back to your question, from what I know now, that it's not the thing anymore.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, so that's the situation. What is the benefit of working for government-run healthcare here in the United Kingdom is, for example, your NHS pension. So they pay some amount towards your pension, which is always good. And I would say, and that's just my personal feeling, that it's not always a good thing, but it's difficult to lose the job in the NHS. When you're in the NHS, you are with NHS forever. I very rarely hear about clinicians sacked from NHS. And again, it can be good, it can be bad. That's what we can discuss today. But yeah, that's the situation in Poland and in the UK. How it looks like down there in Australia, Mr. Steed.
So first off, Alex, the private companies over there, do they operate to the same scope as what the NHS ambulances and paramedics do?
Yes. So if you think about 999 service, yes, they can if they're contracted with NHS, they can do whatever. The same, pretty much is the same scope of practice.
Right. Okay. So we've got a similar setup here, and it's to my understanding, it's in most of the states. I'm not 100% sure whether it's in every state in Australia. But broadly speaking, so the emergency response, so your equivalent of 999, so what we would call 000 here, the emergency response is by a government-owned organisation, and that's who staffs the advanced life support and above ambulances. So when you call 000, when you call 999, you may receive a private ambulance at your door, but they take care of the what we call here non-emergency or the BLS, basic life support. So when you're triaged by the call taker system and then through secondary triage, you may be sent a private ambulance, but they operate at a reduced scope of practice with fewer interventions that they can perform. Everything sort of beyond that, where we transport and everything is the same, and they are similarly to the UK. They are contracted out by the government to perform that service, and the contracts can sort of come and go. But at the moment where I work, there's four services I can think of off the top of my head that do it, and some of them are more in different a certain area than others. But they will all operate to the same scope of practice as each other. Further on that as well, those same companies will often do patient transport, so often inter-facility transfers that are not requiring any ALS scope of practice. They will often be the designated service, the transport service for that, and also with the often with discharges as well. So back to a nursing facility, it'll typically be a non-emergency ambulance or a basic life support ambulance. There are some of these services will often operate not just in this sort of pre-hospital environment as well, but often with medic availability for events and things like that, and certain other circumstances like construction and mining and things like that. Often they'll have the same contracts there. The emergency ambulances can be leased out to events as well, but typically speaking, for the most part, unless it's a big major event, it's usually these private companies. In terms of the work experience from an employer's point of view and the wages. Now, again, I haven't worked in one of these companies myself, but from my knowledge and from people that I know that have and do work in those services, the government services, and this goes pretty much countrywide, are paid a lot better. There's typically better protections, better working conditions, and better equipment as well in the government run versus the privates. Now, that's not a complete hard and fast rule. There are some private services that have sort of very good, very up-to-date equipment, and they're usually the services that have a lot of sort of money behind them. But not all the services have that. One thing that they often miss out on, you mentioned the NHS pensions. Similar things occur here. So our, what we call superannuation, our pension here, in the government-run services is very different to the private services. What they're doing now is a lot of healthcare workers in general are receiving retention payments, as I'm sure is the case across the world. Employee retention is a very difficult thing at the moment in healthcare. So a lot of governments, state governments, who typically oversee the healthcare system in that state, are giving out retention payments, and often the private employees don't qualify for them. So it's only for public employees of either a public hospital versus a private hospital, and the government run ambulance services as well. So yeah, look, as you're saying with the equipment, in my experience, generally speaking, the privates have either older equipment or generally just of a lower quality. Now that can go alongside the their scope of practice. They're not requiring specialized equipment, but often things like their stretchers and the vehicles themselves can often be older than the publicly owned counterparts. Now,
But the intubation tubes
there
are still single-used, right?
well, if they were using them, hopefully they would be single use. But yeah, that wouldn't be in their scope of practice. Now there are circumstances where some private companies do perform higher duties, but they're very specialized. So some services have like a higher acuity transport, like interfacility transport. That is usually at the level of sort of CCR, like critical care nursing, but they're very specialized. And I mentioned before about the wages. There are circumstances where private employers can earn more than those in government roles. But again, often they're in specialized and very different circumstances. So, for example, a paramedic that might be working in a mining service, so overseeing. Often they oversee the whole sort of health and safety aspect, but working as sort of private pre-hospital rather, in a mine, often they can earn quite substantial salary, but their role is very different, and they're often what we call a FIFO, so a fly in, fly out. So they're very remote areas. Typically, they'll fly out for 2 weeks at a time, work pretty much every day for those 2 weeks often, and then fly back home for 2 weeks. So it's a very different role.
Timo.
Yeah, so over here, there's also been a move away from the private providers, just like you said about Poland. So obviously we have like different areas as well, and they are all a bit different. But most places are either a mix between government, fire department, ambulances, and privates, or it might be just the government and the fire department. And government and fire. Yeah, and then there's the capital has fire department plus private. If it's a mix between all of them, they all operate at the same level and do the same jobs straight through 999, or like ours is 112. But then if it's like in the capital, the fire department, ambulances deal mostly with high acuity stuff, and then the privates do like D and C category calls mostly. They also do like transfers from hospital to another, and I think our like hospital transport thing is because I think the EU law now requires that the hospital transfers are actually they go through like this bidding competition, and then who gets the job, basically who gets the contract. So it's rarely run by the government anymore, which is fine. That just means that that there's going to be less useless transfers as well. In terms of like the kits, vehicles, and as I said, scope of practice, it's usually the same. Even in the capital where the privates only do the low acuity stuff, even they have the same equipment and the same skills still, because they will get dispatched to the high acuity calls if they are the closest ambulance. It's just that by default they do the lower ones, and then the fire department does the higher ones. When I used to work with a private provider, the kit was a bit older, and the cars were a bit older. And I think it just comes from the attempt to maximize profit and to like use them until they are done. Whereas it's not the same thing in the public space. But I didn't mind it. It was fine. It was okay. The salary is usually slightly lower than what it is with the government organizations, but it is almost similar though. Only recently now there's been a push towards like rental agencies, like they rent out workers, like you work with a private provider, but they are not a healthcare provider. They just provide the personnel, and they rent you out to a public like a ward or a hospital or something, and then that hospital will pay the company will pay you.
Yeah,
and
it's like an agency.
Yeah, and in those cases the salary is doubled or even more. So it's a bit it's a bit weird. They are saying that, oh, we don't have money to pay public workers more, but they do have money to pay an agency more than double what they pay the workers to get the workers.
And
Well, no,
that's quite interesting point, because that's what I was observed in the United Kingdom in terms of hospitals. Yeah, sometimes hospitals cannot afford own employees, but can pay to the agency. When we all know that the salaries are far better, or pays far better for the agency. I observe it was quite common here, that pathology, that hospital workers were taking annual leave to work as agency employees for the same hospital. It was quite quickly cut down, but yeah, it was a problem a couple of years ago in the United Kingdom. Before we will continue our conversation about private versus government, let's jump to Canada. User Wurets said on Reddit, in Canada, government is usually hands down better than private. Private is usually shit pay unless it's industrial work, but I'm also not sure what provinces other than Newfoundland still have for-profit private ambulance services. That's a quite interesting question. Actually, viewers from Canada, please join in. Please let us know in the comment section below this video how it is in your country. There was one more comment on Reddit already about profit. Bear with. I think I will find it in a second, but actually the user, yeah, it is here. User aspirin dispenser. Hello, aspirin dispenser. We've seen you before on Reddit, so thank you for being with us. He said, or she said, funny how things like pay, benefits, patient outcomes, and system reliability are all suddenly prioritized where there's no profit motivation. So now I will for a second jump back to Poland to 2014, 2013, 2015, when I worked for a private company, private ambulance service. What was different from government ambulance service was that we had only one accountant, only one medical director, only one whoever in administration, whilst the government administration was like really massive. They had like 3 or 4 managers. They had couple of accountants, couple of CEOs, and so on. So what I observed in Poland was that the government-run ambulance service had a huge administration, whilst the privates had really tiny and very effective administration, and that's where they earn money. Do you think it's the same in your countries, or not really?
I think yes, I do agree about the organizational stuff, that there's more in the public space. Also, like some of the privates that we still have, and especially used to have here, they were like family run businesses. So they might have like 1 or 2 trucks. They worked in a small area, and it was run by a family, and then obviously then those family members would be like the CEO and the accountants and stuff like that. So then they would usually also be working in the ambulance. So you would have the CEO driving and treating patients in those very small family-run businesses. And even in the bigger ones, I think there's less organizational levels to maximize the profit. But then also at the same time, the way the contracts especially used to work was that the private providers got money just for being there, obviously, and doing the job. But then they would get extra money if they conveyed patients to the hospital. And then they would get some extra money, but not as much if they treated on scene, like a proper see and treat. But if they went to a patient and didn't do like treatments or procedures, didn't give out medicine, didn't call the doctor to consult and stuff like that, then they would get jack shit, which meant that they were incentivized to just go there quickly, get the patient on board, take them to the hospital, and that would obviously crowd the A&E more. And then the A&E is a public healthcare provider, so then the actual cost of the patient care, instead of being on the private provider, actually fell on the public. And then the public side would pay the privates to get them the patients there, and then they would have to pay to treat the patients as well. So it was not a good system, and they are now still actually cracking down on it. So yeah, in ways it's better, but then also in ways it's not.
It's very similar to what we've got over here, to my understanding, is the more patients that these services can see and treat and transport, the more money they get. And in a way will incentivize them to just make the most of their time and transport as many as possible. At their scope of practice, they also have a how I want to phrase this, very restricted means of referring a patient to another provider. So typically speaking, the non-emergency ambulances, the BLS providers, if they arrive, they have to transport. They can't.
They cannot see
get
and
a
treat
sort of,
seriously. No.
Yeah, often is with now there's certain instances where they can, but often they will have to resort to a consultation with a more senior clinician from the government-run service.
Is it only the mother of the training, or did something happen, like they left patient at home and they died, or what was the reason for that?
I'm not sure as to the origin of it. Often the training often isn't too much of a problem, because often they have the same qualifications, that they've gone through the bachelor degree. They just haven't been able to at that time get a job with the government agency. So the actual education isn't too different many times. I'm not too sure, like I said, what the origin of that rule is, and it is. There are some instances where they can transport, but many cases they're not. For lack of a better term, they're not trusted with making that decision. So they default to transport. And then what we find as well, something that, like, when I encountered, I thought, oh, this is ridiculous. But I understand the reason is ramping has been very bad here for many years pre-COVID. Apparently, it's not so much of a thing. Like, if you guys ramp for half an hour, that's like Armageddon. Like, I ramped the other night for 9.5 hours with one patient before we got a hospital bed. Yeah, it's
What?
yeah. Half an hour is great. If you get a bed within half an hour, that's something is wrong. But often what will happen is we will share patients. So if there's two crews there, we don't both need to be there. Often one can clear and the other crew will manage that patient. And with the government agency, we all do that because we're all colleagues, and we try as best we can to do it with the private agencies as well. So we will often take their patients so they can clear, because I alluded to before the conditions not being as good. Often, like, their protections with meal breaks and their protections with finishing on time are not as robust as ours. So often they're in a worse position in their shift. So often we're taking over from them. But let me stop you here for a second.
Let me stop you here for a second, because it's very, very interesting thing in terms of documentation, of patient documentation. Because we do the same here in the United Kingdom. It's called haloing, hospital liaising officer.
Ambulance liaison. Yeah, we've got the same. Yeah.
So what differs us from private companies is that they don't have an access to the electronic patient report form. So what they can do is only complete the paperwork, like a paperwork, like a classic old school paperwork, whilst we have this computer system now. And what I'm curious about is how you guys do the transfer between so in terms of information governance, do they have access to national healthcare system electronic port form, or is it a paperwork, and how do you transfer the information about the patient between each other?
So our services, the non-emergency providers, have the same electronic patient care record, the EPCR, as we do. So the same hardware and everything. So they're completing the same paperwork as us. When a patient's transferred over to another crew for care at hospital, they will hand over that original documentation, and then the second crew will complete further documentation where required with monitoring. And often what I'll do is just refer to the previous one. Now, sometimes that can be done as a paper form, sometimes it's done electronically, but you can do paper forms as an optional thing in any case. It will still be processed the same. It's just an extra step of sending it off. So.
Okay, cheers. Sorry for the saving.
But yeah, that's not that's right. So not too different with us. But what is of difficulty is when a anonymous one agency, we'll call agency A, agency A has one patient and agency B has another patient. They won't take each other's patients, and I thought that's ridiculous. Why not? We're all trying to help each other, and it's not through any fault of the employees, but because agency B won't get paid for the time that they're with the other patient. And it seems so. Now I'm speaking from someone that's lived their whole life with essentially universal healthcare and public healthcare, and it seems so ridiculous that you're tying up a resource because we don't get paid for that time. But this is what I see as the big problem with privatized ambulance and healthcare in general. And there is a push in Australia, at least in my state, to try claw back a lot of these services into the public sector. But yeah, it's we will take their patients without any issue because it's all the same to us. We just want them to finish on time and the patient gets the same care. But they can't take any other agencies' patients because, and not that they don't want to, but because the company doesn't get paid for it, which I think is just. It seems ridiculous to me, but I understand why.
When I was observing Timu laughed when he said about taking not being able to agency A not being able to take patient of agency B.
I just especially what Harrison said about the problem with the privatized healthcare in general is especially coming from a Finn. I think it's like social democratic Nordic welfare states. In general, and we don't need to we shouldn't get too much into this because this is a whole other thing. But I just think that in general, the biggest problem is that if you are making profit from people being sick, then what is your real incentive to actually make them not sick? Because you will lose a stream of revenue. And I think that's a fundamental problem in privatized healthcare that we can't fix, and that just means that money will always be ahead of the patient and their needs, and that is a really good example of it. And another one, like I said here, the privates would transport the patients even though they might not have needed it, just because they would get more money for it, which means that all of the elderly always got transported to the hospital. And as we know from a plethora of studies, that is very bad for the patient in a lot of the cases. Especially the elderly, they should not be conveyed unless they absolutely need it. And then that's just making the situation worse for the patient. And people trust these companies to do the right thing, or at least they did in the past. Now there's been so many cases outed, especially in the elderly care, that the trust is starting to crumble because people are seeing that the money is going ahead of the patient. I'm not going to go on this rant a lot longer, but that's a good example from Harrison about the problems of private healthcare.
It's a real box of worms, and Like I'm no political scientist or anything like that. But my political education is basically playing Disco Elysium and capitalism versus communism and all that sort of stuff. If you haven't played it, you should really do it. But I the thing that you often hear is like, privatizing services, no matter what it is, healthcare, whatever. It means that people will give a better service because there's more competition and people fighting for these contracts.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like I can understand that thinking, but like if we look at the results or we look at what it's actually accomplished, at least in my experience and hearing from you guys and hearing from some of our Redditors as well, it hasn't resulted in any benefit over what a public service does. Now, you mentioned before about sometimes the public services will have more red tape and more admin staff and these sorts of things compared to
Mm-hmm.
the private ones. And is that using up funds that could be otherwise allocated? Yeah, look, I'm sure that's a factor, but at the end of the day, um, it really should be down to patient care, best patient outcomes, and at least in my experience, what we've already discussed, it seems like if there was a way to lean, and I phrase that very particularly because I'm sure there's plenty of private providers that are watching now that go, I do the very best for my patient, and we're not saying that it's on each provider. It's the agency giving you a suboptimal environment in which to operate compared
Yeah.
to
So
a publicly owned.
so maybe there is a problem. Maybe the problem lies between the government or public sector and private sector, how they actually create the contract. Because I personally feel that the paying privates for transfer only is absolutely ridiculous. So more patient will transfer to the public sector, more money we will get. It's because it to me absolutely it has no sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
So maybe if we could, I mean, if public sector could sort the contract better with privates, it would solve everything. And again, actually my first degree is political sciences, but it was very long time ago, more or less when Moses came down from the mountain with the 10 commandments, as you know. But yeah, what I feel is that governments or public sector is not really interested in fixing this problem, in sorting the relationship with the private sector, because hey, we can always blame them. We can always say that they are greedy because they work for money, because there is profit before the patient. Whereas actually governments also earn on patients. It's just
I
different.
Yeah, like here, for example, I think like ambulance services maybe between 3 to 5% of the entire healthcare funding in the area where I work, for example. So it is a minor thing. It does get more attention than it should based on the budget because it's just so media sexy. But there's also it also means that people who are not really equipped to do these sorts of contracts with the private providers are the ones drafting them, and they don't know what they should be asking for. They ask the wrong things, and then it's also, in my opinion, not the fault of the company for then taking advantage of that contract and maximizing profit based on it. So, like as you said, I completely agree. It needs to be within the contract, and it needs to be directed with that. But that also means that we need better people drafting the actual contracts themselves and asking for the right things. And it's clear that it wasn't done because people thought that the ambulance service is a transfer service,
Mm-hmm.
like a transfer service for sick people. And then they made a contract. Okay, you will get money when you transport sick people. Very easy.
Ambulance drivers.
Yeah, yeah. And now we can clearly see that wasn't a good idea, and it's not what's required.
But actually, I don't know if you remember, guys. And now I will make a quick disclaimer for our viewers. A couple of days ago, we've seen an article I've sent from I think Arizona, from America, where actually the ambulance service had to transfer every single patient they went to. Like, there was no hospital avoidance, there was no leaving the patient at home, see and treat protocol. You get the truck, you were taken to the hospital whatsoever. And we had this conversation saying it's absolutely bollocks, it's nuts, it's crazy, it's makes no sense. But as I said, Arizona, as I said, America, I think it's time to jump across the ocean to see what Gina has for us. Now, I received a couple of questions before the show. Why Gina is not live? Why she always sends a video now? Ladies and gents, if you think about time, I'm on one end of the spectrum. Harrison is on the end of the spectrum. Timo is slightly, nearer to me. It's like an hour or 2 hours between us. Whilst Gina is somewhere. It's like 3 o'clock at night where Gina lives. So or she works because she's very, very busy. She has like 3 or 4 jobs with privates, I believe. So we'll see in a moment what she will say about privates. But yeah, she's very busy. So either she's working or she's sleeping. So hence why we don't have her live on the show. However, I firmly believe that we will see her face live, and we will be able to have this conversation live. Meanwhile, straight from United States. Actually, the video has been sent like 3 hours ago, so hot off the press. Gina LaRue in the United States of America.
Hello, this is Gina LaRue with the United States of America here in St. Louis, Missouri, and today we're talking about being a clinician in a private service or in a public muni service or government-based job. So a muni is like, let's just use the city of like Florissant or the city of, and I'm throwing these names out and you probably are like, I don't even know where that is. It's a specific city, and the city has their own fire and EMS service. So whenever the taxpayers pay taxes, they pay that specific ALS and fire tax for that pumper and or ladder truck and or ambulance. So they pay for that particular service. So those firefighter paramedics, though they make significantly much more money, and their union is part of the fire service and EMS service. So their insurance is cheaper through that specific union, and it's government-based and taxed. So a private agency, let's just say whatever agency it is, there's hospital-based private agencies, and then there's regular hire private ambulance agencies. So whenever you apply, you have to pay for your own insurance. So that's the kicker. So sometimes they make good money. You make pretty decent money in private EMS, but then you have to pay for your own medical insurance. And each medical insurance, whatever, if you're single, if you have double, if you're a family, it's going to be taken out of each bi-weekly paycheck. So this is prior to being taxed. So there is a slight little break, but you still have to pay for your own insurance. Another thing is schooling here in the United States is not based off of private or muni, but you would have to pay for your own. Some places do put you through their specific fire academy. So St. Louis City has their own fire academy. St. Louis County has their own fire academy. And you could go through a community college and pay for your own fire service 1 or 2 and obtain that so that you can apply to these places. So my advice is, if you're going to move here in the United States, please pick a state, whatever state you want to do and whatever you want to live in, and find out what rules and regulations and guidelines and what their immunities are if they have private or hospital EMS agencies, or even fire services. There could be a hire for fire. That sounded funny. But anyway, please do your research, and I hope you guys have a great day. Please stay cool or warm wherever you are in the world, and have a good night. Bye.
Hire for fire. Paying for own insurance. That's something. And now I will let all the Brits know, guys, it's normal in Poland. So if you work for either government-run or public sector, or you work for privates, you buy your own insurance, and it's not only the health insurance, it's also this medical liability insurance. You also pay for your uniform. In the United Kingdom, there's nothing like that. Of course, you know that. I am talking to my British viewers. You get your uniform, you have your insurance paid, and if you're a member of College of Paramedics, you also have this bit from medical liability covered by the College of Paramedics. But it sounds really harsh to pay for your insurance and stuff. Is that the case up in Finland?
Only if I worked, like if I had my own company and I would like basically sell my service to a private provider, let's say, I could do that if somebody wanted to do that with me. That would mean that I would probably get a really high salary, but then I would have to pay for my taxes, pay for the liability insurance, pay for my own gear and the clothes, and basically nobody does that just because it's such a hassle.
But is it
now
a hassle, or is it not financially viable?
It's a hassle. It is very much viable. I have a coworker, and he did that when the COVID vaccinations were being given out. So basically, he went and did the vaccinations as a like a solo employee of his own company. Basically, sold his service to the public hospital that did the vaccinations, and for him that was very good. But he already had the insurance because of a different thing that he does as a like as a company himself. So he already had it, but it was very much viable. Like, he was getting really nice pay for doing those vaccinations.
So if I understand correctly, because I think that it's time to wrap up and sum up our conversation, is it financially viable to be private in Finland, and is it common?
It is viable. At the moment, I think the push is towards public healthcare. Even more so, the privates probably will be going away. Maybe as a transfer service, they will stick around and like supplement the system. But as a paramedic working, either one is fine, in my opinion.
So let's use analogy from our previous live. For those who did not see our ECG live, which is called 5 Things You Didn't Know About ECGs, amazingly run by Mr. Harrison Steed, our ECG expert. Please watch it. The video is on our channel, www.groupcall.uk. So, Mr. Silver, 2 thumbs up for privates, or thumbs up, thumbs down? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Okay.
And also,
Mr. Steed.
Yeah, mine's borderline extreme deviation as well. Yeah.
What about you,
The
Alex?
providers, the ones I've encountered, yes, but as a
company.
general rule, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now, in terms of Poland, there's no private run ambulance service anymore, so I cannot tell. Back then I would say it was good. Now there's none. UK wise, I would say that again, it's financially viable, but still I feel, and it's more feeling than knowledge that government or public sector it's still more stable as an employer, and that's I'm saying that from the perspective of the person who lost his job a couple of over 10 years ago, in completely different sector. As you may know or not, I was a journalist or editor, and when I lost my job in 2008, on the beginning of the massive crisis in media sector, I could not find my job. I couldn't find the next job, and I had a mortgage to pay, and that's awful thing. So therefore, from 2008 up till now, one of the most common factors for me is the stability of an employment. So even if I could earn more in the private sector, I don't think I would be tempted, because it's still quite common that the agencies are signing contracts with NHS and then are losing contracts, and it's quite a busy environment. Whilst I prefer stability, I'm old, you know that. Now it's time to be a grandfather, sit down with my pipe and just enjoy life. Back to the topic. I would say thumbs up and thumbs down for private sector in the United Kingdom. And with that being said, I will say thank you guys for being with us. It was Group Call Live with Mr. Timo Silver, live from Finland, and Mr. Harrison Steele, live from Harrison Steele, I'm sorry, not Steele. Harrison Steele, live from Australia. And Gina Lurie Wendy, recorded from the United States, but hopefully soon will be live. Guys, thanks so much for watching. Please...
Currently 2 a.m. for it's currently 2 a.m. for Gina. I just looked up the St. Louis time, so
yeah. If you're on shift, Gina, hello. Stay safe. If you fast asleep, just good night. Ladies and gentlemen, www.groupcall.uk. That's the place to go for more of our live videos, live streams, and some clinical videos if you fancy that. Meanwhile, stay safe and see you in 2 weeks. Bye, guys.